Hey guys, today I want to continue on the 4 Mistakes series, and I'm going to hit a hero that I have not ever done a 4 Mistakes video for. If you're curious about this series, it's basically looking at 4 to 5 mistakes on heroes, as well as I'll give a build guide, something that's more of my preference rather than something that might be like the meta build. With all of that being said, let's talk a little bit about Hogger. Hogger is a bruiser that is known for kind of his crazy bouncing off the wall ability. This being Hog Wild. When you hit a wall, you bounce off, and it continues the Hog Wild a little bit further. This ability can seem kind of chaotic, but what I want to show you guys today is that it is not as chaotic as you might think. So, the first mistake is efficiency and wave clear. What I mean by that is Hogger is one of those that he has no mana cost, and he has to be balanced because of that. And so, to account for that, he has some downsides. One is that his wave clear naturally is not that great. So a lot of people will drop down a thing, they'll spin forward, spin back, they'll cancel it early, and they'll use the Q with the crit damage to finish it off. Now you can wipe a wave, and you'll have your loot horde back, usually by the time you're going to head back up to the next wave. So in this wave, we're just going to drop down a bomb, do a couple auto attacks, and we'll probably do a Q, maybe a couple auto attacks, and we'll go back up to this wave again. And then at this wave, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to drop down the loot horde. We're going to then drop down a W, and we are going to E forward and back. We're going to cancel early and use our Q, a couple auto attacks to finish it off. Now, picking up your meat is something that you need to do every single time for efficiency. So one of the biggest mistakes that people make on Hogger is that, one, they don't wave clear very fast. They sit in their lane for a long period of time, and they kind of just waste time. So when you don't have Loot Horde and you don't have your Hog Wild, it should look something like this. You're going to hit all of the backline minions at least once. You're going to knock them together, and then we're going to do one more W. And we'll finish off these guys that aren't in there, and then we'll back out. And so essentially it makes it an 8-second clear, well, about 10-second clear. And then on your second one, you're going to do exactly what we had right here. You cancel early, you knock into it, and then you press trade, or you mount up and you leave. And that's how you can double soak very easily. Now the efficiency is where we can add one more step to this. What I mean by efficiency is you're going to be constantly taking damage. And so every other wave, you're going to be dropping down a loot horde to heal yourself. But where people start falling short is they tend to only use loot horde for doing quick stuns, where you drop down a loot horde and then you stun, or they do it for wave clearing. And then people just generally don't use loot horde very much outside of that. I ask for efficiency, meaning that you use Loot Horde every time that you need healing. If you need to only solo a lane and the other lanes are being soaked, use Loot Horde every time that you need that healing. And that's going to increase the efficiency, it's going to allow you to stay in lane longer, and it's going to make it to where you don't need to back as often. Hogger should almost never back. He should never have to use Hearthstone unless you really need to get back to base to defend. But you should be efficiently going through the game and managing your health as if another hero might manage their mana. And so that's something that you need to be really looking at with Hogger. So correct wave clear and efficiency. You can clear these waves you could double soak as early as level 1 with Hogger. It's very efficient, and you have a lot of extra healing while you're doing it. So Hogger is really, really good for macro, especially. So the next thing is going to be memorizing angles. There are a lot of angles on maps that if you memorize these angles, you can do things like infinite, or at least near infinite spins, which means if there's a fight going on, you're constantly doing damage to everyone and you're really hard to deal with. There's also 4 versions of them, which 4 versions might be that you bounce off of this, you go up here, you bounce off a wall here, you bounce over here, you bounce down here, and then you come back over here again. It doesn't work here, of course, because there's nothing up here to do it. But memorizing angles on different maps is something that you want to do. Now, I could bring out a Hogger video specific to all the different angles on all the different maps, but there's just so many that I would recommend going into custom, going to the map, and finding out areas near team fights where you can get good angles. The other angles that you want to memorize are camp angles. So in this particular case, there's no angle that you can do, but most camps have an area where you can go up or down or left or right, and it will go near infinitely. Now, getting these angles might be a little frustrating because if you see, we can kind of line it up to where it lines up like this, but if I actually zoomed in, you'll notice that it actually doesn't overlap perfectly. It still kind of goes off a little bit. So even though this looks like it would go on infinitely, this probably won't actually go on infinitely. It'll probably eventually still knock me down a little bit. And when you have less room in between the two angles, it's even harder to do that, which is where I get to the third mistake. And that's that people don't understand how to do pristine angles. I've talked about pristine angles before with a tip video I did for Leeming a long time ago. What a pristine angle is it's a way to kind of look further. So you can see it's a lot easier when it's further away. But if there was a really short angle, something like this, you notice it's going to be a lot harder to get that angle perfect because it's going to look better in a shorter area, even though it's really not better. So what we do to make this perfect is we're going to just go all the way over here. And now that angle is a lot more likely to be perfect, right? Because you've gone further and you've made your angle a little bit better. So these pristine angles make it easier when the areas are pretty tight. What I mean by that is when you have like just this small little window that you need to hit here, and then you need to hit this small little window here, and then you need to go down and hit this angle. When you're practicing your angles, I recommend also looking at if there's a way that you can create a pristine angle, meaning that you can zoom out over here. Now, you don't need to zoom out this way. You can literally find a position that you have a common angle in. Then you can kind of aim over here and do this, and then you can find where to click. And you can memorize those. Now, do you have to do this? No. But if you can find a few angles like this, it's the difference between probably a 10% win rate on maps like Infernal Shrines, where you're naturally going to be winning the objective as long as you're spinning. Well, if you only spin for 1 rotation versus if you spin for 8 rotations, your odds of winning that objective are increased significantly. And so memorizing angles on maps that it's important where you can expect the fights to be in specific areas like Volskaya, Infernal Shrines, even like Sky Temple. Anytime that the fights are basically stuck in one area, memorizing those angles are huge. Pristine angles, by understanding about going further out with the angles, because you can see it's a lot easier. If you had to aim it right here, we can see on the other side where it's going to go. But it's still pretty hard to aim it out. But the further we go out, you see the movement on the left is smaller, right? So if we're right here, a small movement is huge. And so it's really hard to get a perfect angle. But if we go over here, small movement is much smaller. It's the same movement, but now it's a lot easier to get it perfectly. When we go further out, it's even smaller. We go further out, it's even smaller. And so learning these pristine angles are one of the best ways to make sure that you never have any issues with Hogger. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about rage management and specifically no control. So, rage management on Hogger is pretty straightforward, right? You attack, you gain rage. Some of your abilities have different ways of getting you a little bit of rage too. For example, landing your W can get you 10 rage. And then also, if you were to stun someone against a wall, you get 15 rage. Auto attack W, auto attack, and we're at 35 rage. So you can level up your rage fast. Now, what your rage does. So the first thing that your rage does, where is the, oh, it's over here, is it makes it to where your cooldowns refresh faster. But the second thing that rage does is it makes it to where your Hog Wild does more damage. So if you get 100 rage, you're doing 50% more damage with Hog Wild. Managing your rage is important to keep throwing abilities out, and the way that you manage your rage is pretty simple. You just make sure to get an attack here and there so that you can keep that rage going. If it starts to time out, just make sure that you throw out one ability, and even if it starts timing out this much, it doesn't instantly fall apart. You just get one hit. Hogger is really good at having an in and out playstyle because of the natural ability for him to jump in and out of fights. But you also don't want to be losing that rage. Now, you saw when I was using my E, I did not gain rage, right? And unless you take specific talents, you don't gain rage from using your E. Now, you can take damage while your E is going, and that keeps your rage going. But if you're not taking damage, E can cost you rage. You need to be careful about that. Now, what's important to note about Rage when you get No Control, which is level 20 talent. And No Control is a really great talent in the sense that you can actually 100 to 0 specific targets if you do it correctly. And it doesn't take very much. So let's say, for example, we're against a Jaina. We'll throw a Jaina over here, and I'm just going to throw in a basic build, nothing crazy. We're just going to throw in something very basic. And then No Control. If I go to Jaina and I simply just press No Control, I can sit on Jaina and do a good portion of her health, about half of her health, before the No Control ends, right? That's pretty good. But now, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to toggle cooldowns. That gives me full rage. And what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use No Control at full rage. You can see now it does just a little bit more, right? Instead of doing about 60% of her health, it does about 50% of her health. No Control's damage is increased by the amount of rage you have. If I do No Control, I can't do it here, or else it's going to bounce around. Maybe I can knock this away and do it here. No. But either way, we can see there's 800 DPS. Let's turn off toggle cooldowns, and I'll do the same thing. We'll wait for it to time out. Alright, so same thing. We're going to knock them away, and we're going to click No Control. So instead of 800 DPS, we're about 550 to 600 DPS, right? And so the damage is reduced because this is an untalented version of Hog Wild, or No Control is an untalented version of Hog Wild. So we have Hog Wild, and we know that Hog Wild's damage is being increased for every point of rage. So the mistake that a lot of people make is they will use No Control without any setup whatsoever, and then what you'll have is you'll lose out on the power of it, which requires that you have all of your rage available. So what I instead recommend is start off the fight and don't immediately No Control. Start off the fight, potentially do like one of your combos, and kind of go from there. Build up a little bit of rage. And against a Jaina, she's probably just going to end up dying. But once you get a little bit of rage, then you can use your E to get a little bit closer to the target. Then you can pop No Control and take out the target. And it's a much better way for leading to kills. And in fact, it's a considerable amount of damage if you can build up rage. And you can build up rage on anything, right? You can build it, or at least you could. I don't know if you still can. Let me double check that, because I know there was a patch recently. Yeah, you can build up rage on anything. So let's say that we hit these minions. You can build up rage on minions, and then you can go jump at an enemy hero. We'll toggle cooldowns for a second, and then we can No Control, melt her down, drop that, and then finish her off, right? Like, you can literally jump in the backline, and you can 100 to 0 their backline without them having time to react, as long as you can build up a teeny bit of rage before you do that. So those are the 4 mistakes on Hogger. There are a lot more mistakes on Hogger, but I think these 4 mistakes will be the biggest things for pushing you forward ahead of the other Hogger players. Number 1, correct wave clear will allow you to get faster double soaking and increase the overall economy of your team, right? You're going to be giving your team much more experience, and you're going to be giving your team more ability to roam around while you're double soaking so that they can go engage or try to steal camps. When you memorize the angles, it's going to give you a much better chance of grabbing specific camps on specific maps, as well as it's going to improve your ability to win specific objectives. When you get pristine angles, it's going to even further increase your chance of winning objectives. With those first 3 tips, what's going to happen is you're improving your macro dramatically by increasing your wave clear, by increasing your camp clear, and then you're also going to be improving your ability to win objectives. So now you can win objectives, you can win in macro. The only thing that you really struggle with are fights that are outside of objectives and maps that don't have a lot of camps or macro. And that's where this No Control tip will add to a lot more value, because you can build up a lot of your rage in another area, and once you build up a decent amount of rage, you could go in to the target and quickly drop them out, which we don't have No Control, or we're near enemies with it. But still, we just killed probably a couple of the backliners there, especially if we could just add in a quick stun or something right as no control ends. And so you can see really quickly how no control can get out of control very quickly and take out enemy backlines. Those are the 4 mistakes. Now, I'll talk a little bit about the build that I recommend. This is not the meta build whatsoever, but it's still a build that I really recommend you guys try out. So let's talk about it. I like to get the quest for your W. I like to take the W talent at 7 as well, so you can quickly do like the WQ thing and then throw more bombs out. I find this build makes it to where you're very tanky because you get a large health bar by the end of the game. It gives you a ton of self-healing, and if there's a stalemate fight, you can be poking the entire time during a stalemate. And if there's an aggressive fight, then you still have the same E capabilities that you had before. There's only one adaptation I generally make to this build, and it's where I sometimes won't take this talent and I'll take Headbanger. And the reason that I'll make that adaptation is mainly if I need to actually lead to the kills myself, or if I'm mainly just being an annoyance. So if my job is to go into the backline and lead to a kill, I'm going to go with Headbanger. If my job is to kind of zone out their backline and just be as annoying as possible, I'll go Kablooey. And that's the main difference between them. If I need to like drop down this, charge behind them, and then stun them against a wall, drop down a W, like that's when I'm going to be going Headbanger, because it is enough damage to kill most backliners without it, but if you do have it, it's a lot more significant. And it also can kill... this is also good if you're running a comp that's running front to back, because you can just kill their tanks. So that's the adaptation I make. As far as level 4 and level 13, I go the green E talents, but I have been kind of playing around with going brute force instead, as well as bloodthirst, because brute force increases your attack damage and bloodthirst makes it where you heal more off of your attack damage. And so I have been playing around with this a little bit, mainly because what's been happening is I can poke people quite a bit, but if the fights start getting serious, the nerfed versions of these talents, as well as your E, has made the fights a little bit weaker. So you can change Brute Force and Bloodthirst instead of the E talents if you want to go more auto attack based. But it definitely depends on what the enemy team is. Do they have more CC? You need to go E. Do they not have any CC? Well, auto attack build could be really strong to take them out. And you can go no control or anger management. You could go secret stash. I actually really like secret stash in this build because every time that you hit someone, you heal for 8% of your max health with a dynamite, and secret stash throws out extra dynamites. Not just that, but you also can lower the cooldown of your dynamite every time that you hit people with it, and so you're naturally lowering the cooldown very quickly. You become kind of unkillable if you're in W build and you grab secret stash. So again, do you need to lead to kills, or do you need to just be annoying? You decide what you need, and that's the build that you go. Those are the 4 mistakes people make on Hogger, and one of my favorite builds on Hogger with some adaptations. Keep in mind, this is not the meta build. This is not what the pros are going. This is just a build that I personally find success with, and a build that I enjoy playing. Thank you guys so much for watching, and feel free to check out my other videos.